Hello love, and welcome back to Shadow Sessions. I am Master Mindfulness Coach Katrina Shearhart, and today I wanted to talk about the very interesting phenomenon that happens when you become a parent and how it shifts your entire perspective and your relationship with your own parents, and just really how those perspectives impact healing your own inner child, and if you're doing the work and you're being a conscious parent and all those things and you're breaking those cycles, just those shifts that come. And one of those things that I've noticed that have been triggered for me a lot recently, especially since becoming a single parent, is the sacrifices, right? When you're a child, you don't really appreciate the types of sacrifices that your parents make to give you a good life, to make you a better life. A lot of the times when you're a child, you have these little bits of like anger and resentment and frustration because you can't do the things that you want to do, right? You can't understand that because that part of your brain just isn't developed. But you see your parents as the bad guys, right? You see them as being a block to the thing that you want, which later on in life, plays out in lots of other different ways when it comes to us feeling disempowered with going after the things that we want in life. But it's very interesting once you become a parent and you are put in a position where you either by circumstance have to make these sacrifices, or whether it's by choice, things that you are choosing to remove from your life to give your children better opportunities, right? Or whatever it may be. So there's this really conflicting feeling that happens internally, right? Because as a parent, you have that sense of disempowerment in a whole other way, because a lot of the times you want to do these things for your children, but circumstances may not allow you to, right? And you're making these sacrifices that ultimately either go unnoticed or unappreciated. And this can show up in even a partnership dynamic as well, right? You make sacrifices or you compromise, and depending on what those sacrifices are, what those compromises are, it can be a really big hit to the ego, right? If you're giving up something that you deeply desire, something that you deeply want in lieu of someone else, that's where a lot of like resentments can develop, right? Because you are giving up a big piece of yourself, you're not honoring that piece of yourself, and either it's for the benefit of both and you have to come to an acceptance of that, or you step back and realize that you are operating from a sense of codependency or wounding, and you gave up something that you really didn't want or need to, right? You didn't stand firm in your own boundaries, and that in itself can be a whole thing. But when it comes back to the whole, your parents make these sacrifices, or you as a parent are making these sacrifices, coming up to these moments, they become a very big reflector, right? They become that mirror in your life where you start to see the things that your parents did in a new light. Whether, they were unable to show up for the school play and you felt like they weren't there to support you, when really they were working 80 hours a week just to pay the bills, keep the lights on, and put food on the table, right? It's not until you're an adult or a parent that you really appreciate or even just comprehend to that level what is required to just live, right? And how so much of the things that we think we want or we think we desire are really extras, and they're beautiful things that enrich our life. And it's not to say that you can't have those things, but they're not always the forefront of the mind when our base natural response is to care for our physical immediate needs, right? That Maslow hierarchy of needs, that baseline, that bottom, your root chakra, if you don't feel stable and secure in your, first and foremost, in your being and in your environment, in your home, in your career, if there's any kind of stress or rift there, then nothing can really be built upon it. And this is even where we start to see like poverty cycles playing out, right? Because generation after generation, if they can't even have those basic needs met, then you know those emotional needs are also not going to be able to get met, because all of that stress that's being imposed upon just the basic need to survive, right? And as you grow up and as you become an adult and you take on more responsibility in your life, and you know you have your own bills to pay, you have all these other responsibilities, you really start to see the impact on your own system. And that's, you know, where we start to develop like anxieties and depressions, because our minds become so focused either on, you know, the fact that we're stuck where we are or in the past, or you know that those feelings of lack, which depending on what they're connected to can be really hard to heal. And then you also have anxieties, which is like focusing too far forward, or that those kind of like doomsday scenarios, like, oh my god, if I don't go work today, I'm not going to be able to pay the bills, right? And it's really hard to find those balances, as well as to lean into a state of receptivity and have your nervous system, that parasympathetic nervous system, turn on and realize, hey, you know what, I'm going to be okay, we're going to make this work. And depending on, you know, what your background is, but your socioeconomic availability and all of those things, there's so many factors that can play into that. And a lot of the time, I don't think we take the time to think about that from a first person, and we also don't take the time to think about that for others and how others may be showing up or, you know, not showing up. And even in terms of having a parent who may or may not have been emotionally available to you. If they were putting all of their time and energy into just providing, they may not have had the capacity to provide you that emotional support, and that's hard. But once you start to have this wider scope and understanding and grace, and you understand like how those things interplay, and you have a level of forgiveness and acceptance, that everybody's just doing the best they can with what they have, right? Especially like on a parent-child dynamic, or even if you're looking at intergenerational cycles that are playing out, and intergenerational traumas and things like that, because at some point you're going to have to realize that your parents were operating from what they knew, as well as what was common knowledge and techniques at the time, right? Not to say that it was appropriate or right or wrong or beneficial or, you know, any of those things, but they only knew what they knew at the time, right? You can, you know better, you do better. And that's what we see with each generation, right? Each generation learns new things, new information becomes available to us, whether it be through science and studies or just the collective conscious awareness. But once you know better, you recognize those patterns, you choose to do better, right? And if you want to take a look at my life personally, my parents were both entrepreneurs. They worked from home. They were always there. They were always present, to a point that it was like annoying and frustrating for me and my siblings, right? Because they were just always there. But if you take a look at their parents, both of my parents come from families where they were abandoned by one or both of their parents, right? My mom's dad was in and out of their life, and whether or not, you know, he was a good character or not, she felt the lack of his presence, that masculine energy in her life. And that is something that continued to play out in her narratives throughout her life, and even into, you know, the way that she would talk to us as children. And my dad, he was adopted out. Both of his parents gave up him and his siblings, and he held a lot of resentment for that. He was adopted into a very wealthy family, but they were also very abusive, right? So there was a lot of conflicting energy and feelings there, and based on the things that they experienced in their youth and as they grew up and in their relationships, it greatly impacted how they were able to show up emotionally for me and my siblings. Both of my parents are also fire signs who had 3 water signs, so you can imagine the amount of emotional energy that existed within our home. And my parents come from a very volatile energy. There's like a lot, we grew up with a lot of very explosive rage and things like that, because they were never taught how to manage their emotions, and they were not able to show up in a healthy way and model those things for me and my siblings. So for the longest time, you know, we had to learn to circumnavigate not only our emotions but our parents' emotions, and that's a lot for a child to take on, and that's a very common trauma, is managing and dimming down your own personality and, you know, waiting for a reaction, because you don't know what type of emotional reaction you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to get the love and support that you need, or if you're going to be met with, you know, discipline, right? Because you're triggering something within your parent. And this is one thing that I am just so happy to see with the conscious parenting movement and gentle parenting movement in general, is that level of self-awareness of, hey, I'm being triggered, let me, the adult, handle this, and then I will address my child's behavior. I am so happy to see that shift, and I'm happy to be a part of that shift and to talk about that shift. And coming from a space of being an early years educator all the way up through the primary grades, and then working with, you know, young adults, and being a part of that shift and seeing that shift has been amazing. And we're getting there, but there's still that suppression of emotion, that being unsure if it's safe to emotionally open up, right? We also have a big culture that, you know, creates a lot of shame, and just negative implications, as seeing, you know, trauma bonding and sharing as a negative thing, when done appropriately can be a very positive, healthy way to develop relationships with people who understand you, right? I've talked about it before, that triggering is very different in these trauma bonds versus I'm connecting with someone who's gone through similar things with me, and I feel safe in their presence because we have this mutual understanding. Those are very different spaces. And once you start to see the difference in those relationships that trigger you and trigger those things within you, and that's an invitation to address it and respond to it and heal those patterns, because they will go back to your childhood wounding, versus, you know, showing up to any kind of relationship where you're consciously aware of that and you're able to support each other. It's a very healing space to go through that. It's a very healing thing to have those types of relationships and to foster those types of relationships and to have those discussions, much like the one I'm having now with you, about, you know, just being able to appreciate the sacrifices and having that shifted awareness once you become an adult or a parent on the things that your parents went through, on how they were showing up, and having that level of forgiveness and seeing how it shaped you, and having that sense of grace and understanding, and allowing that to be something that helps you choose better for yourself and better for your family, and really impact how you positively show up in the world and serve your own communities, right? Because the more aware you are of your own patterning, of your own triggers, the more you are able to communicate that, the easier it is to set boundaries with others, easier to set boundaries with your parents and say, hey, this is, you know, how this affected me. This is how I see you showing up. This is how I am changing that, you know, and setting that boundary. Hey, if you can meet me here, great. I would love to continue to foster this relationship, you know, with you. Or if you can't do that for me, then I have to set this boundary within our relationship, and we can't talk about certain things, or I can't, you know, spend holidays with you, or whatever it may be, right? But having that real, honest conversation with yourself about those things, about what shaped you, how you're showing up, and if you are a parent, how that is trickling down into how you're showing up. And it's really important to not just have that awareness, but to take the action from it. A really big one that I am really proud to kind of break the cycle in my family, back to the whole, my parents were always there, is my father was present physically, but he was not present, you know, within himself. And I would call him out on that, and it was very hurtful for him. But because he worked from home and he had all these stresses and things, like, I have an understanding of that now because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a parent, and now that I hear my son mirroring it back to me, saying, hey, you know, you're always working, I want you to be here with me, can you put your phone down, you know, asking for me to be present with him, like connective present with him, and not just physically here, is something that I have taken great strides to do for him, for myself, and for the other relationships in my life, to really be wholly present when I am with someone, to give them my undivided attention, and to mentally, emotionally, as well as physically be there. Because when you're not, people catch on to that really quickly, and it's hard to develop a relationship or even maintain a relationship when one or both parties are not fully present, right? So being able to break that cycle has been amazing, and not only that, but it's been amazing to kind of have that grace and forgiveness for my own parents, and understanding that, yeah, they broke a cycle, they were physically there, but the next step was to be, you know, mentally, emotionally present as well, which they were unable to do for several reasons, and I have given forgiveness and grace and understanding for that, and I, being the conscious adult parent now, get to break that cycle, and will continue to do so, and we will see in time, you know, how that impacts my son. And knowing that his love language is quality time, I'm able to better respond to that, and better able to show up and be that conscious parent. So I urge you to take a look at the repeating patterns within your own life, within the things that your children or your friends or your partner says to you, and ask yourself, what is really being communicated here, and what pattern am I being invited to break at this time? So I hope that this has provided you with some kind of insight or inspiration. I greatly look forward to speaking to you again. Take care.